that you have access to all these other things, or that you can take your questions, you know, about a corner and apply it to a curve, or, you know, and I think that for me, I was really interested in having that very flexible thinking sort of operate within fiction, within narrative, where fiction felt to me a lot more strict about what it could allow to happen and what it could allow to bend or to break. And so, but there's a, you know, there's a long history of fiction that finds a way. And so I think that I've always just sort of been trying to figure out how to do the kind of thinking that I want to do, where there is like an attention to language, but there's also an attention to time, attention to memory, attention to order, and then drawing just sort of like blows it all up and you know, allows it to happen in like a present time, allows you to kind of think of it mechanically or energetically, and then to put sound to bring that dimension in. It's just all the things that you can't, you just can't fit in the sort of the syntax of writing. It's just incredible, and I think obviously I would just want to kind of keep adding on to those layers, and sort of like building out that in between space.
So Megan asks, if you have collaborated with Val before in the past, and if so, how, and just commenting that you guys seem to have an incredible rapport together.
I'm so glad Megan asked that question, because so Val and I did a similar presentation for the University of Georgia this past spring. And I wanted to talk about how different it was from what we did, what you've just seen, because it was, and that was our first time. So we've had the conversation about wanting to work together, but that presentation in spring was our first time doing it together, and we did it live over Zoom. It was not as sort of fancy in terms of different camera angles. So it was just like her window next to my window, so you could just watch us make at the same time, which was really interesting. But I noticed that when we did it the first time, I drew much faster, and it felt more like I was kind of doing what she was doing. And I noticed in watching the video, I was saying to Danielle, who's watching with me, I was saying, drawing is so slow, which is, I don't always think of it that way, but compared to the way in which she was moving and the sound she was producing, I felt like I was on an entirely different plane. Sorry, it's just gotten very bright in here. So yeah, I feel like we are just beginning this collaboration. It just feels like, well, now I sort of want her to put sound to all of my writing, because that makes me, like, even apart from drawing, it's just the fact that I gave her this essay, and what she was able to do, like turning the language like toward and elsewhere, is just incredible. And I love just hearing what she's done with that work, but also being able to occupy it through drawing is incredible. So I hope that there's more for us down the road.
So I have a question here from Jen Bervin, a comment. Thanks, that was wonderful. And I think you may have, this may be for sort of an expanding of what you were just talking about, but she says, can you talk a little bit more about the collaboration process that we just saw unfolding?
Yeah, and I think in terms of, like, in one way, I feel like in one way Val's doing more, because she's taken this recording that I made and she's sort of, you know, filtering it, playing with it, distorting it within her sort of system. And and what that does for me is, and that's why I mentioned earlier, sort of like about this generosity. It's like it is that she's giving me a space, like another kind of thinking space. And then Val has said, and I think as you can tell from the video, she looks at what I'm doing and then sort of tries to build off of that. And so the idea would be that there's this kind of, you know, revolving call and response that's happening in the work. And our our first conversations about this had to do with sort of, again, me wanting to make drawings or do writing that pulls things out of this kind of like non-visible space that I've been talking about lately. And I was doing black paper drawing, so it was this all this hidden stuff with, or non-visibility within black space. And so what she was doing in her own work is sort of like, you know, really attuned to certain kind of spiritualities and energetics in sound, and that she could connect with in my lines. And so the idea was like to see what would happen if we kind of put those two interests together. And I don't, you know, I'm not sure where we're going with it. I think that there's a lot to think about in terms of like pulling out certain languages around you know, what she's interested in and what her training is and what I'm interested in. I just think that there could be even more sort of, other than the kind of aesthetic pleasure of watching it, I think that there's a lot to talk about in terms of that relationship to non-visibility or to Blackness or the in-between, et cetera. Thanks, Jen.
So Esteban, one of our producers, asks, was there any expectation before the performance of what the sound design or drawing would look like? Any coordination or boundaries set in advance?
No, and I probably wanted there to be a little bit more, because I have a Virgo moon and I feel like I was safer if I know what's happening. But Val was just sort of like, you know, let's have fun. And when I think the first time that I heard her work with the text was right before we performed it in the spring. And so I really didn't know, but I did know because I know a lot of Val's music. I didn't know that it was going to create a space for thinking, and that's sort of all I needed to make work. The drawings are so different. The first set I did were these black paper drawings with lots of pastel, and it was very messy. And I just wanted this one to be slower because I realized that I didn't need to draw fast, just because the music was faster and it was making me think fast, that I wanted to try to train my body to actually go slower. So, but this was just what I was thinking. It wasn't really agreed upon. So, so yeah, we, in a lot of ways, we were improvising, and we sort of knew, she had seen my work, so she sort of knew what the kind of lexicon of our different marks would be. But other than that, we just sort of made a space together.
So Celia Greaves asks, when is a piece of art finished? How do you know, and have you ever regretted releasing a piece into the world because it wasn't finished, or you wanted to do more with it?
Wow, yeah, I think that question depends on which type of work we're talking about. Like the drawings that I did for Prose Architectures, which is the first book of drawings that came out. There's about 160 or something in there out of a series of 314 or 20, I can't remember. And the point, those drawings happened really fast, and they were the first drawings in the series of like city writing architecture drawings. And there was no pressure to sort of finish them because I knew that as soon as I was done, that I would immediately start the next one. So like being able to work in series, there's a feeling that you're building, similar to writing, like you're building a kind of narrative through the accumulation of the drawings. And so that was, that's a lot, that makes the drawings that I do in serial sort of less pressure because and also it's sort of like redirects my attention. I'm interested in what happens by pushing forward. And the single drawings are, to me, those are more interesting in terms of addressing that question because sometimes it depends on if I'm drawing because someone has commissioned something and I have to release it. Or if I draw something, I'm like, I like this, and I put it away, but then I pull it out, and since I put that thing away, now I draw moons. I might feel like I need to put a moon on that drawing. In fact, that's my problem right now. It's like everything now needs to have a moon or several moons or ladders. So I think that it just depends on what the context is around the work. It feels like there's always a way, because it's like with novel writing, even though I try to kind of interrupt that straight line, there is this kind of like you begin at the beginning and then you write until you reach an end, and usually that's like has to do with my narrators arriving somewhere or departing somewhere. And I feel like in the drawing, instead of that sort of like accumulative progressive movement, it's more lateral, and so that I can, if I'm here, I can work there if I want to, and come back here later, or like work over there, time pass and come back there. And it feels like it's less about sort of altering the narrative than it is building out something. So the more I add, the more sort of problems there are to address, or the more thoughts about space are being created, and it feels freer. It feels like there's more space in that.
I just have a quick follow-up to that too, because I'm thinking about that idea of, when you go back and you look at something that you've put out into the world, and there can be that desire to just go back and change it forever, and then there's that desire to just sort of be done with something. But what about, I mean, it's an interesting question to ask. This was an improvisation that we watched today, but we filmed it about a month ago.
Yeah.
And I wonder how it feels to just go back and look at something that was fully improvised. Like, do you bring the same eyes to that you would to something that you spent time composing and recomposing and editing and so forth after it's gone out into the world?
Well, it's so different because I really, it's very awkward for me to watch myself. And there's all these things I'm discovering by looking at myself working and looking at my face, and so it's awkward. I'm sort of looking like this, but so you guys put together that the sort of teaser where everything was sped up, and I watched that so many times. I just thought it was really delightful kind of cut of all the different things that were recorded, and then it was really interesting to see it like so drawn out that I wanted to kind of speed it up again. I think that I like it faster, or like I felt more vulnerable or something because it was slower. So it made me think about time and sort of like real time versus slightly edited time. In terms of that improvisation.
Yeah. Anonymous attendee asks, do you consider yourself a visual artist or a writer first? Maybe another way of asking this is to ask, what comes first when you are initially conceiving a project, images or words?
Well, I always think of my drawing as another kind of writing, or like a writing without writing. or like figuration. So it's less image based in my mind than it is like a motor or map for thinking. And that is very much entwined with writing. I think my bio says I'm a writer and artist. I've been writing for so long, it would seem really kind of unfair to all those years to put artists before that. And I do think that I am a visual artist, but that's something that's new. It feels like it took me a while to even feel okay about saying like, this is visual art that I'm doing. It's not just text, it's not just drawing writings. And I think probably when I started adding color or other shapes is what made that more possible. But they definitely are entwined. Like I don't think that I would ever really want someone to look at the drawings without thinking about writing, without thinking about what it means to write or the body writing or the time of writing, because those things are sort of core to that work. Even if when I start working on larger sheets of paper, I'm not thinking about text as much anymore, but it's still the way in which writing is this kind of inaction of thought that's always present. So I want them to be together always, I think.
Allison Van Ree asks, do you listen to music when you're writing? If so, what do you usually gravitate towards?
I don't. I love music. I don't really, I can play music and draw, but it's hard for me to have music playing while I'm writing, because the music I think would pull me out of what I'm doing. It wouldn't be just background. So when I was much younger, I used to write sort of like in a crowd. If people were over, I got really excited that I would sort of like go to a corner and write while other people were sort of like maintaining reality or something. But I love lots of kinds of music, but I like to dance when music is playing, lots of different kinds of music, even classical. I like to dance when it's playing. So that's, yeah, writing is usually, lately, it's more like just the sounds of the day.
Oh, that's a nice lead into this next question. First, it says, thank you so much for this. I love what Val did with your drawing and with your language, is specifically cut and malleable. So much of your writing seems to center around space and structure and movement. And I'm wondering how you thought about movement, especially musically, how movement is a sort of container in creating this drawing for Val as one piece of your collaboration.
So I wonder if that person means movement for Val. Like, okay, I'll try to answer that.
Maybe that person, if they want to follow up in the Q&A box, I can clarify, but why don't you go ahead?
Well, one thing, so whenever someone says something about movement, it always makes me think about the field, like of everything, but the field of writing, the field of the, like around the body. I often, when I'm talking about writing, quote from Erin Manning, who talks about space as a commotional field, which has really been incredibly influential to me as a way of thinking about not just the space where our bodies go, but also the page as this space that's like already in flux and already shifting and already alive and pulsating before you even, drop your thinking into it or pull your thinking out of it. And so that, to me, that sort of interaction between my making marks and Val making sound, it feels like, you know, we are sort of contributing and moving within this kind of commotion of lots of other elements. But then I think I would say that for each of us, the thing that we're responding to is also a space in which we're navigating. And I think that I feel pretty strongly every space in which we are, or like every sort of medium in which we are thinking and moving is a kind of space. So the sentence is a space, the page is a space, the word is a space, sound is a space, like a mark is a space, the gesture before you make the mark. And so I think of all these kind of like overlapping spaces that are all commotional, as being, I mean, that's sort of like the super generative for me, and the core of I think what brings me back to writing and back to creating is wanting to sort of touch all of that movement and sort of be changed by it and change it.
I mean, I have another good question here. I wanted to just, a note to everybody in the audience. I noticed somebody posted a question in the chat box. Could you please post it in the Q&A if you'd like it asked? So the next person says, thank you for an incredible event. I'm a big fan of your Ravickian books, which have a strong imagistic, visual, spatial element. I feel like they push your brain into a new shape. I find myself trying to, quote, see things that are ephemeral or just really strange as I read. What are some of your favorite authors or works in a similar mode? Also, will we be getting any more books about Ravicka?
Ravicka.
Sorry, Ravicka.
No, we've gone through this.
We have.
You're not alone.
I was coming off Ravickian, so my tongue just went.
You're not alone. I am working on. I've been writing a book for a long time about the grasses of Ravicka that I'm struggling with a little bit to finish, because I wrote it while I was while my drawing was changing and my sentences were starting to mimic the drawings, and then I put it away, and sort of like everything changed, and it's been really hard to kind of go back and put myself back in that space. And it's a book that's like full of characters, and it's kind of like a epic, a brief epic, if that makes any sense, on the Ravickians and their history. So I hope that finishes. And then I'm also writing a book that I think is sort of like a book within a book, about architectures that have to do with Anna Petova. What was the bigger question? Do you remember?
What was it? We're talking about, you know, the challenge of trying to visualize your work and other writers that you find that kind of work in that mode.
Yeah. God, I started Ravicka so long ago. It's like almost 20 years ago. Or I encountered Ravicka. I think that someone like an artist like Julie Marais-Too is really important, has been for a long time, to my my thinking about the way that you can like imagine architecture and sort of create a feeling of it sort of in motion or exploding or changing or being layered by other things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, or just like the thinking about the line sort of having all these different lives. I don't know. I feel like I feel like I don't read the people who really helped, like led me to Ravicka so much anymore. Samuel Delaney's Dahlgren is something that was really important to, I think for me, it was really like giving me confidence that I could find a place that was its own, that had its own rules, and that I could sort of like feel confident and building that place. But I don't know, for some reason I can't really think of right now. I'm really enjoying Atel Adnan's paintings, which just the color in them is really blowing me away, and the way that the colors sort of becomes this way of thinking, like of partitioning space. It's like she uses the color to build her landscapes as opposed to sort of like drawing a distinct tree or a distinct horizon. And I just really love the way that sometimes the colors are matched in a way that I wouldn't have expected, that those colors are neighbors of each other. I'm really thinking about color a lot. I don't know so much what to do with it, but I think that when you put a color on a page, especially when that page has formerly been writing, it does this incredible thing to me about location and reach. And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And I'm sorry, I can't think of who I should be naming right now, but I do feel good in being able to say Judith Marie too, and Samuel Delaney, but there are countless others that I should be saying and can't think of right now.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question about your work, that it does seem to challenge your ability to visualize the material at times, and as you move from one moment to the next, as soon as you think you're starting to see something, it changes into something else. And so I wonder, are you somebody who, when I know people have different experiences of text when they read, do you visualize what you're reading?
Yeah. I'm just not a very, I've always said, so maybe I have to change this thought, but I don't think of myself as a very visual person. And I used to say that before I started drawing, but I think it's still true with drawing. I'm not the kind of writer who, even though I've done this, but I don't really, I don't describe the pot on the stove, or, I don't feel like I really set the setting, but it's like I know that the place that I need to have in order to move forward is like I need a kind of city, or I need a kind of urban environment that is, in my mind, sort of full of unknowns and difference, and sort of like that's what helps create the experience for the narrator, full of mysteries or things that like incongruencies. So it's like I always, and I also am just generally fascinated by like concepts of verticality or concepts of horizontality, or like the idea of texture, like that a building has a texture that you can touch. Like a building feels so enormous and kind of like out of the scale of the human, but you can walk up to a building. Like I've always been sort of fascinated by those things, but they don't necessarily feel like visual experiences to me. They feel more, it feels more like about a kind of philosophy of experience, where it's figuring out how to articulate where you are and why you are where you are and what it feels like, and then all the kind of stories and slippages that happen as a relation to that. So it feels to me like a lot of it feels like a mental or an emotional feeling that inevitably becomes visual, because you just end up using those words that give people, something to picture. I can't talk about houses and houses moving without people visualizing what that looks like, but it's not necessarily what I am sort of most gravitated towards. It's more like what the idea of a house, like how that resonates when it's written, or when it's said, or when I'm trying to draw some semblance of that. And that to me feels not exactly visual, but I understand that it becomes visual. That makes sense.
Christina Hanhart says, the Zoom environment really highlights for me how much you talk with your hands, Renee. And today's presentation really underscored the materiality and physicality of your and Val's art making. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the different materiality or process of drawing versus writing, if there is one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talk with my hands a lot on Zoom, and I do this, like I do this like eye boom thing. I don't know where I got that from, but I did not do it pre-Zoom. It's like, I don't know, remembering that, oh, the world is there. It's not just me looking at myself. The materiality, I think that's a good question. It follows from this question around like the visual world. My material is so abstract, but it's like it abstractly about these very, in a way, like material objects, like buildings. And buildings couldn't be any more material or like any more solid, but they sort of exist in my mind as more like problems with space. It's like it's my version of math, because I couldn't figure out the sort of like accepted version of math. This is like the way that I sort of figure things spatially, is through thinking about these like really material things and abstract, but buildings, light, the absence of things, like all of that is my material. And then sound is amazing, because you can't, like, where, I don't know, I think about this too with poetry, sort of like, where does it exist? I love the way that it kind of, it's something, we hear it, but to me it's interrupting all these other ways of thinking and of being, sort of like, so Val's, I don't know how to describe this, but it's like Val's playing creates all these different levels for me to kind of exist, or to think. And I can't describe how it does it. I don't know if it has to do with like certain keys being able to open up, certain notes being able to open up certain spaces of thought. But I love the mystery there. I love that it's so immaterial physically, but it has such a huge impact. Music does, sound does, and the impact that it has is like, it's like it asks you questions, or it tries to me, music has the ability to get you to, I don't know, to really sort of like think about where you are in time. I think lots of things do that, but the way music does it is amazing to me. It kind of comes through the floor into your body, or like, you know, through your ear into your body. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very sort of slippery idea, like the material. I've been thinking about that a lot. Yeah.
There's a nice kind of follow-up here from John Keene, fellow Windham-Campbell Prize recipient. Would Renee say a bit more about the relationship between how she is currently thinking about and working through the relationship between her sentences, one of the key sites of her innovation, and the drawings, particularly the mark making, the use of color, the sense of space, and how this new thinking might be changing her text-based projects?
Totally. It really has changed it a lot, but I feel like so I started doing the prose architecture drawings in 2013, which just blows me away that so much time has gone by. So even my thinking about what I'm doing has changed a lot. What really got me excited about the drawings was I I felt it wasn't just like a dream or fantasy. I felt distinctly that by drawing, I was still doing a kind of writing, and being able to address writing or tend to writing by looking at these lines, and by making these energies and these maps, and now like putting ladders on them, or adding moons. It really it did point back to writing, and the possibility of the sentence, which, you know, I've always wanted and talked about, sort of like being able to be extended in all these ways. And you have to do it. I mean, you can't change the movement that is like a sentence just simply has to move forward, because that's the way our language does in order to make sense. Like I have to progress to a verb at some point. You just have to do it. Otherwise, I'm not making a sentence, and I never make a point. But the drawing sort of taught me that I could kind of go forward in my thinking, and then I could go backward, or I could kind of circle this way in a thought, so that elasticity of the line really sort of changed the way that I was able to move in writing, and that sort of affects what the writing does, what I want it to do, and what I use it for now, which is really interesting. Been writing a lot about space and architecture differently than I used to, where I feel like I'm experiencing the contours of that space by simply writing through the syntax of certain work. And I don't think that I would have been able to feel it the way that I do if I hadn't been drawing, and if I hadn't learned through drawing that writing really could do this, and that the imagination really is doing this, even though it's in a line that's making it sort of look like it's doing that. And being able to occupy those at least two sort of realities, while also, you know, talking about whatever it is I'm talking about. It's a really wonderful kind of multiple way of being that I really appreciate. And I think I've always been doing it. I just had to sort of get to this place where I really could not so much. I feel like when I was first writing, Henry James was a writer who was really important to me, and I called myself sort of like writing. My sentences were matching his sentences, but they weren't in reality. Like I couldn't figure out how to write a long sentence that did all the things that his sentence did. But in my mind, that's what I was doing in my sentences, like in Juice, which are actually very short. And I feel like through drawing, I learned how to sort of extend that space, figure out how to spiral and how to circle in a way that is organic to the thinking that's happening in the work. And I assume that I will continue to develop that, you know, I'm not like done. So it's exciting to see. And I think that what will happen in the language in my future writing does have to do also with this collaborating with sound artists and composers. I've worked with other composers like Mauricio Pauly. We've done a very different thing together, but I just feel like adding sound to something that's already full of drawing and architecture and like a kind of poetic being is just it's just exciting. Yeah.
Well, Renee, I think we've run out of time here, but it's been such a pleasure to talk to you and hear you today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks everyone for tuning in and asking incredible questions.
And thanks to everybody for coming. I hope you'll join us at the same time next week when our guest will be poet Natalia Centers-Sapico. Until then, see you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.